Love bombing. Love bombing is a deceptive tactic where a manipulator showers the victim with love, attention, and praise to make them believe they are genuinely loved. Through excessive compliments, gifts, and promises of a wonderful future together, the manipulator makes the victim feel like the most important person in their life. In reality, the sole purpose of this fake positivity is for the manipulator to gain power and control as quickly as possible. Additionally, manipulators make the victim dependent on the praise and then suddenly withdraw it, causing the victim to become more demanding and submissive to the manipulator's desires. Historically, it is said that Adolf Hitler used these tactics to win over his wife, Eva Braun. Ghosting. Ghosting refers to the act of suddenly cutting off all communication and contact with a loved one, friend, or similar person without any warning or apparent reason, and then ignoring any attempts by that person to reach out. This can be particularly hurtful for the person on the receiving end, leading to feelings of exclusion and rejection. Some mental health professionals view ghosting as a form of passive-aggressive emotional abuse, akin to giving someone the silent treatment. It is often seen in relationships among young people and is considered a type of psychological abuse. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is a psychological manipulation and abuse technique where one person tries to make another person doubt their perception of reality, memory, and mental health. This is done through confusing lies, withholding information, and shifting blame onto the other person. By denying the other person's accounts and rejecting their perspective, the manipulator weakens the victim's trust in their own judgment. The term comes from the 1938 play Gaslight, in which a man tries to convince his wife that she's going insane, and she realizes this when he dims the gaslights and denies doing so, making her doubt her reality. Triangulation. Triangulation is a tactic used by a manipulator to influence the relationship between themselves and the victim by involving a third person or group of people. The manipulator uses this third party to create hostility towards the victim, or uses their presence to apply pressure, incite jealousy, or make the victim feel insecure. For example, a manipulator might use another person to distort the victim's words or emphasize their relationships with others to make the victim feel worthless. This is done to isolate the victim, weaken their social support network, and increase the manipulator's control. Triangulation is a complex technique used to manipulate power dynamics and distort the victim's perception of reality. Shifting the goalpost. Shifting the goalpost is a technique where a person continually changes the criteria or rules for success. In this manipulation tactic, the manipulator arbitrarily and suddenly changes the goals to ensure the victim can never fully succeed or be right. This undermines the victim's motivation and self-confidence while strengthening the manipulator's sense of control and superiority. Shifting the goalpost can be used in arguments, job performance evaluations, and personal goals. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is a tactic where the manipulator uses the victim's feelings of guilt to control them. For example, a friend might say, "I'll be very upset if you don't come," to pressure you into attending an event you don't want to go to. The manipulator exploits the victim's emotional vulnerabilities to get what they want. Guilt tripping causes the victim to consistently submit to the manipulator's demands, feeling guilty and inadequate in response to the emotional pressure. This technique can negatively affect the victim's emotional health and self-confidence over time, leaving them perpetually vulnerable to the manipulator's emotional coercion. Isolation. This technique involves manipulating a person by deliberately alienating them from their social environment and support network. The manipulator cuts or weakens the victim's ties with friends, family, and other important relationships, thus cutting off their connection to the world. This way, the manipulator gains more control and influence over the victim. The victim becomes isolated, and their decisions, thoughts, and actions can be more easily influenced. This technique is especially used in coercive relationships. Aggressive jokes. Aggressive jokes are seemingly harmless but are actually sarcastic, belittling, and hostile. These jokes are made to demean and hurt the victim. As a result, the victim loses self-confidence and feels worthless. Aggressive jokes mask criticism and target the individual, causing emotional harm. The victim lives in constant fear of being criticized and mocked, which negatively affects their self-esteem and relationships. Aggressive jokes serve as a tool for the manipulator to assert their power and superiority over the victim. Defamation. Defamation is the tactic of spreading lies and rumors to damage the victim's reputation. For example, a rival at work might spread baseless gossip about you to tarnish your reputation. This creates distrust and suspicion within the victim's social circle. Defamation can severely damage the victim's professional and personal reputation. The victim is forced to constantly defend themselves against the manipulator's lies. This technique can negatively affect the victim's social relationships and career in the long run, as they must continually protect themselves against the manipulator's falsehoods. Playing the victim. Playing the victim is a technique where a person deliberately portrays themselves as a victim or someone who has been wronged to manipulate others. In this method, the manipulator triggers others' feelings of guilt, compassion, or protectiveness. This allows them to avoid real responsibility, attempt to control others, and often achieve their desired outcomes. When faced with criticism or responsibility, the manipulator quickly adopts the victim role to turn the situation in their favor. This technique can be used in a wide range of contexts, from personal relationships to workplaces. Changing the topic. Changing the topic is a technique where a person abruptly shifts the conversation or discussion to their advantage. In this method, the manipulator diverts attention away from an uncomfortable, challenging, or unwanted subject, avoiding addressing the main issue. This allows the manipulator to control the direction of the discussion, obscure the real problems, and invalidate the other party's arguments. Changing the topic can be used in a wide range of contexts, from personal relationships to social and political debates. False morality. This tactic involves the manipulator pretending to have high moral standards and values to gain power and control over others. On the surface, no one likes an authoritarian or aggressive leader, so manipulators mask their true intentions and behaviors through various means, such as supporting a cause or charity to signal virtue publicly. Manipulators who claim moral superiority often exhibit hypocritical behaviors. Unfortunately, it falls upon the victim to recognize and call out this hypocrisy, which is often challenging, making it an effective but difficult to expose tactic. Silent treatment. The silent treatment is a deliberate act where a person stops talking or communicating with someone to punish them emotionally. In this method, the manipulator cuts off all communication with the victim, causing the victim to feel guilty or confused. The victim often conforms to the desired behavior to re-establish communication and return to a normal relationship. The silent treatment is used to gain power and control in relationships. Threats. Threats can manifest in various forms. Firstly, the victim may face threats of physical violence or damage to their property if they do not comply with the manipulator's demands. Emotional threats can also occur, such as the threat of ending a relationship or spreading damaging rumors over a minor disagreement. Financial threats include the risk of cutting off financial support or jeopardizing the victim's financial situation. This is often used by hackers against companies following data breaches. Financial threats can quickly escalate into legal threats, where one party threatens to sue the other. Social threats involve the manipulator threatening to ruin the victim's reputation through lies, smear campaigns, and defamation. Playing on insecurities. Playing on insecurities is a method of manipulation where the manipulator exploits the victim's insecurities and weaknesses. For instance, a partner might constantly bring up topics related to your insecurities about your appearance, knowing it makes you uncomfortable. This undermines the victim's self-confidence and increases the manipulator's control. Playing on insecurities makes the victim feel perpetually inadequate and worthless. The victim feels vulnerable in the face of the manipulator's criticisms. This technique can severely damage the victim's emotional health and self-esteem in the long term, forcing the victim to remain constantly on guard against the manipulator's criticisms. The victim does not feel comfortable or safe around the manipulator. Shaming. Shaming involves publicly criticizing a person's behavior, appearance, beliefs, or feelings with the aim of humiliating them. This method seeks to control the person by making them feel ashamed, thereby undermining their self-confidence. The shamed individual begins to doubt their self-worth and feels guilty. This manipulation often goes beyond constructive criticism and aims to demean the person. The victim lives in constant fear of being criticized and judged, which negatively affects their social relationships and psychological well-being. Shaming is especially common in relationships with power imbalances. Projection. Projection is a tactic where the manipulator attributes their own negative qualities or mistakes to the victim. For instance, if a friend constantly calls you a liar when they are the one lying, this is projection. The manipulator avoids guilt by shifting their faults and responsibilities onto others. Projection makes the victim feel perpetually defensive, guilty, and inadequate in the face of the manipulator's accusations. This technique can damage the victim's self-confidence and emotional health over time, forcing them to remain on guard against the manipulator's projection tactics. Emotional blackmail. Emotional blackmail is a tactic where the manipulator uses the victim's emotional vulnerabilities to control them. For example, a partner might say, "If you love me, you'll do this," to manipulate you. The manipulator exploits the victim's fears and guilt to get what they want. Emotional blackmail leads to the emotional abuse of the victim, making them feel constantly guilty for not fulfilling the manipulator's demands. This technique can negatively affect the victim's emotional health in the long term, leaving them perpetually vulnerable to the manipulator's emotional pressures.